Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on May the 1st, 2023. Happy Beltane! Yes, it's a big Celtic festival. This festival is the kind of halfway mark between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, at least in the northern hemisphere. And from a Celtic perspective, today was celebrated often with big bonfires, and it's a time for us to, of course, get in tune with nature, and perhaps to get into our pagan roots if that's what we're into. Now, it's another festival, a very different festival, and it's May Day, as in a festival celebrating the workers, celebrating workers' rights, celebrating the struggle against oppression, the struggle to get a fair wage, to be treated well, and to make sure that one's employers don't walk all over one. So that's a very different thing. And so under those circumstances, it's kind of inappropriate that the person I'm going to talk about today has got a birthday. Yeah, that person was a Nazi student leader. His name was Hanns-Martin Schleyer, and he was born on May the 1st, 2015. And he was a nasty piece of work. As a student in the early 1930s, he was really upset when his fraternity decided not to exclude Jews. And so he made a big fuss about that. I think he left the fraternity. And through the 1930s, he became a student leader, not just in Germany. He moved to Bohemia, which was the former Czechoslovakia, because the Nazis had taken it over. And he organized student affairs in Prague, I think at Charles University. And I think he was involved in economics and involved in the German attempt to make the most economically out of Bohemia, out of Czechoslovakia or whatever it controlled then. So yeah, he was a nasty piece of work. So why do I bring him up? Well, you know what the strange thing about this man, Hanns-Martin Schleyer, is? Although he was a Nazi student leader, he is celebrated in Germany. There are streets named after him. There's a prize named after him. There is a stadium in Stuttgart named after him. I mean, can you imagine like an Adolf Hitler stadium in Germany, or something like that? Can you imagine that? Okay. He was a very minor Nazi, but he was still a Nazi. So it's weird that he's celebrated. Yeah, he was an officer in the SS. So yes, he may have been very young when he criticized his fraternity for not excluding Jews. But as he went through his 20s, he didn't stand up for anything. He just went with the flow. And I suppose there were a lot of people like this in Nazi Germany. They did what was right for them. They didn't really care about the morality of the thing. He was just one of these fellow travelers of Nazism. So what happened? Why is there a stadium named after him? Why are there roads named after him? Why is there a prize named after him? Unashamedly, it's not being hidden. The German establishment think he's wonderful. Well, what did he do? Well, after the war, he used his wartime contacts, to help him in his career. He got a job with Daimler-Benz. 1960s, he got involved in employer organizations. He was virulently anti-union, virulently anti-workers' rights. Remember, it's May Day today. Virulently anti-workers' rights. I think the New York Times said something to the effect that he was, the caricature of an evil capitalist. So he naturally attracted the attention of the German left and the far left, and the Red Army faction, which was a terrorist group, on September the 5th, 1977. They kidnapped him. They made various demands for his release, but the demands weren't met, and his body was found on October the 18th, 1977, I think, in a car in eastern France. So that's why, I suppose, because he was murdered, therefore there's some kind of redemption in his murder, that we can forgive the past. That I don't think that's a good thing. We should just never forget. He was a Nazi student leader. He was a member of a Nazi party. He was a junior officer in the SS. And so, yeah, he's still commemorated in Germany as a symbol of virtue. I don't quite get that. So anyway, we're going to look at his chart, see what shows up. So here he is, Hanns-Martin Schleyer, born on May the 1st, 1915 at 8:45 in the morning in Offenburg, Germany. So, what's the big thing about his chart? Well, I don't find his chart particularly interesting. I suppose one has to notice that he's got Sun and Mercury in Taurus and Venus and Mars in Aries. So that's kind of two different energies. I see, the Sun-Mercury conjunction in Taurus as, he's quite a conservative person. He represents conservative politics. As I said, I don't think his Nazism continued after 1945. He was just like one of these people. They go with the wind. He was a fellow traveller of Nazism because it suited him at the time. After 1945, it was no longer, obviously, suitable to be a Nazi, so he became something else. And so that would be the Taurus. Now, what about the Aries? Well, here is someone who stood up in the 1930s to condemn his fraternity for not excluding Jews. He stood up, made a big name for himself. That's Aries. That's his Venus-Mars in Aries. Moon in Sagittarius, being very clear about his opinions on the matter and not caring who he offends. And I suppose Aries thinks of the moment. Of the moment, Nazis are in power. I'll do whatever I need to do to maximize my own position and my own career prospects. So that's how I'd see it. In the 1960s, when he was representing, working for employers in Germany, he was very strident in criticizing the unions and attacking workers' rights. I think he was on TV making big, bold comments, which of course attracted attention and in some respects led to his death. Now, as far as his death is concerned, I wanted first to look at the solar return before his kidnapping. So here's the solar return. It's quite a straightforward solar return. So this is close to his birthday, April the 30th, 1977. That is April the 30th, 1977. That would be 32 years after Hitler died exactly, but that doesn't really mean anything. So that's a solar return. And what we notice here is, firstly, we've got that same Sun-Mercury conjunction in Taurus. Now, I know the Sun is always going to be in the same place in a solar return, but Mercury will drift. But here Mercury is picking up on that Sun-Mercury conjunction is a repeated theme from his horoscope. Also, look at Saturn. Saturn is exactly square the Sun-Mercury conjunction. And Uranus, a planet of gunfire, explosions, sudden events, is exactly opposition it. So this T-square, as we say in the jargon, does suggest danger. And I mean, he was certainly aware of danger. When he was kidnapped, there was a police escort right behind him. So yeah, he certainly knew he was a marked man. And I think that this solar return very much reflects it. Then we've got the chart of the kidnapping. So he was kidnapped, I believe, in Cologne at 5:29 p.m., I think. And we can see an exact Mars-Jupiter conjunction. Now, Jupiter is supposed to be a fortunate planet in astrology, but Mars-Jupiter contacts are not good. I think it was Charles Carter who said that something like a Mars-Jupiter opposition is the worst aspect in the book. It's because Mars is about aggression, assertion, and then when you put Jupiter with it, it just goes over the top. So you had massive violence. The Red Army faction, I think they killed a lot of people in the process of kidnapping him. There was a lot of gunfire. And so that's reflected in the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. Then the Moon opposition Neptune. You know, part of the reason the kidnapping succeeded was because of a bit of confusion. I think that his car, someone pushing a pram crossing the road, and his car had to brake, and then the police car behind him that was following him went in the back of him, and that of course gave the Red Army faction the opportunity to move in and kidnap him. So so in that sense, the Moon Neptune opposition may have worked actually quite well for the kidnappers. Then there's Venus. Now the position of Venus is interesting because Venus is square Uranus. Now Uranus was opposition his sun. This is a planet was opposition his sun during the solar return, and it's kind of moved away from his sun. But then Venus has brought the whole thing back. You see, Venus is at 9:35 Leo. Hanns-Martin Schleyer's sun is at 9:52. So, in other words, Venus squaring Hanns-Martin Schleyer's sun by trine, squaring it 90 degrees. Venus was not. Didn't matter the fact that Venus is a planet of love. What mattered was that it was Venus. It was just a planet, but was acting as a trigger for the longer term Uranus aspect. So I think Venus was the final kind of lock in the combination which allowed the kidnapping to happen. It's perhaps also, and I suppose controversially, one might want to consider the karmic aspect of it. And I'm kind of on thin ice here, but look at Saturn. Saturn is at 23, at the time of the kidnap, Saturn was at 23 degrees 21 Leo. So if we go back, remember that, 23-21 Leo. And then Hanns-Martin Schleyer, his south node is at 2308 Leo. So he had Saturn on his south node. And the south node is a point of karma. It's what one does in the past. And so Saturn on his south node kind of suggests this is payback for what he'd done in the past. Certainly that's how the Red Army faction saw it, but I think in terms of him as an evolving person, remember we are all evolving, doesn't matter how bad we are, as an evolving person, Saturn hit his south node. It was time for him to pay for what he had done in the past, whether it was in the 1960s, whether it was in the 1930s, whether it was in the 1940s, whether it was in some previous incarnation. So in a sense, yeah, Saturn represents perhaps, I won't say justice, but it's like karma at work, and this is how it completed. Of course, he wasn't killed during the kidnapping, not straight away, but it it was the following month that he was murdered. But I think there is certainly a karmic element to that, and I know many people will disagree with me. So anyway, I've said enough on Hanns-Martin Schleyer, and I will now look at today's stars. So today, Monday, May the 1st, 2023, what's the main thing? Well, look at the moon. The moon is in Virgo, separating from a sextile of Mars. At the beginning of a day, and if you're in Europe, you may find that you can actually get quite a lot of things done, a lot of good organizational work. So beginning of the day, get that organization sorted out, paperwork, whatever. Yeah, you'll do really well. But having made the sextile to Mars, the moon moves on to an opposition to Neptune. And that represents a certain amount of confusion. Things might they might be out of place. So we have to be careful not to go too far. Once we've done what we need to do, we need to stop, relax, and not create the possibility of making mistakes. And while all this is going on, notice that there's a fairly exact conjunction between the Sun and Mercury. In other words, Mercury is in a really bad position. Mercury is retrograde, and it's combust, i.e. it's conjunct the Sun. So with that conjunction, organizational things could go wrong, messages could go wrong. If we're traveling, we might get lost. It's a bad time for making decisions. It's a bad time for making complicated journeys. If we're sending messages, emails, whatever, we need to double check. Don't communicate with people in one way. Use several ways to be really sure that your message has reached its intended target. So what else? Well, on a different note, as far as relationships are concerned, the hypothetical planet Cupido is opposition the Venus-Mars midpoint. Now, Venus-Mars is connected with sex. Cupido is connected with unions, and one interpretation of this, suggested by Witter and other astrologers connected to the Hamburg school, is that, by the way, the Hamburg school is a school of astrology in Germany, which is very, very into midpoints, is into hypothetical planets, and into other things like 90-degree dials and so forth. So that's just why I said the Hamburg school. As Cupido is about unions, that suggests that the sexual act has implications. So that would mean, for example, if you slept with someone today, that act might suggest a commitment. It might lead to a long-term relationship. It might lead to marriage. It might lead to other ties. So, in terms of, I don't know what your lifestyle's like, but if you have a free and easy lifestyle, and you have a perhaps temporary promiscuous disposition, sex needs to be perhaps avoided today unless you are aware of the implications, because it's not just a meaningless act. It could lead to ties that you weren't necessarily expecting. As far as my forecasts for the 12 signs are concerned, here goes. Aries, 3 stars. You can be an effective organizer, but you're sensitive to pollutants. Taurus, 3 stars. Something you thought was fun is slowly becoming boring. Gemini, 2 stars. Avoid making decisions. It's difficult to think straight. Cancer, 3 stars. You start off energetic, but as the day progresses, the confusion mounts. Leo, 3 stars. Don't cramp people's style. They need to be heard. Virgo, 2 stars. Do you really know what you're doing? Libra, 2 stars. The majority of your fears are groundless. That should be 3 stars. So even 4 stars. I'm not saying all your fears are groundless, by the way, just most of them. Scorpio, 3 stars. Friends can be trusted, up to a point. Sagittarius, 3 stars. Partners find it difficult to think straight. Capricorn, 3 stars. Some of your beliefs need to be revised. Aquarius, 3 stars. The evidence might be rock solid, but it still needs to be checked. And finally, Pisces, 2 stars. Today, the only person you can trust is yourself. Okay, so now let's move to the I Ching. So I threw the coins, and the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 10, treading. Now that's the image of being close to a tiger, maybe a sleeping tiger. And what you must not do is tread on a tiger's tail, because otherwise you're going to get bitten. So you have to be very careful. So we're in a situation where we do have to be careful. We mustn't take risks. Now, fortunately, I think we're not going to take risks. It's a situation where we're going to see the danger, but we're not going to do anything. We're going to accept that this is not a time for taking dramatic action. That's great. But the hexagram 10 moves to hexagram number 12, which is standstill. Now, standstill doesn't sound good, but it's kind of logical, isn't it? The reason we're going to be in a state of standstill is because we're not going to take risks. Yeah, we could think, oh God, if I'd only just done this, then look at all these opportunities that would have happened. But no, if you had done all these things that you regret not doing, you would have been taking a risk. And in fact, the tiger might have bitten you. So at the end of the day, when you see that things are at a standstill, when you see that things aren't happening, it's fine. The reason it's happening is because you didn't take a risk. Because the reason it's happening is because you weren't stupid. And surely that's good. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for today. And I will talk to you tomorrow.